dive right in. Today we're going to unpack uh, absolutism. I mean, what does it actually mean when one person holds like all the power in a state?
Yeah, when they effectively become the law themselves.
Exactly.
Well, at its core, absolutism is, a form of government where the monarch has total unchecked power. They're considered to be above the law and, well, they make all the decisions.
And that concept must have been just revolutionary at the time, right?
Oh, completely. Because if you think about the Middle Ages, power was so fragmented.
Right, spread out.
Yeah, the king was the highest boss, sure, but nobles had massive control through feudalism. Cities had their own rights.
So this shift, starting around the 16th century, was this huge push by monarchs to kind of gather all that power for themselves.
And that push was hugely contentious. It was not a smooth transition at all.
I can imagine.
And what's fascinating is that this drive for central power often provoked, the complete opposite reaction.
You mean like with Philip II in the Netherlands?
Precisely. His centralization attempts led directly to Dutch independence in 1588. And even more dramatically in England with King Charles I.
Right, he tried to seize too much power from Parliament
And he was overthrown and, well, beheaded. So the stakes were incredibly high.
But then, and here's where it gets really interesting, we have the undisputed model of absolutism succeeding.
Louis XIV of France.
The Sun King.
Yes, starting in 1661, he really becomes the prime example.
So what was his justification? I mean, how did he pull it off when others failed so spectacularly?
He used the ultimate political justification, droit divin, or divine right.
The divine right of kings.
Exactly. The belief was that the king got his power directly from God and was only accountable to God.
Not to Parliament, not to the people, not to anyone on earth.
No one. It's a pretty solid foundation for unchallenged rule, isn't it?
Okay, but a celestial mandate is one thing. What about the powerful, disruptive nobles who are used to having their own local power?
And that is the absolute genius of Versailles.
It wasn't just a palace.
No, it was a strategy. A gilded cage, really. He kept them close, busy, and under constant surveillance.
With all those elaborate ceremonies, the feasts, the balls.
And performances. Their entire status became dependent on how close they were to the king.
And I read that the height of status wasn't, being a great general anymore. It was these intimate, sort of menial tasks.
It's incredible, isn't it? Nobles would compete for the honor of handing him his nightshirt or his shoes or his walking stick. The more intimate the task, the higher their status. It kept them completely distracted and reliant on him.
And, this is probably a good moment to just say, if you're finding these historical deep dives useful, please do take a second to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment. It really helps more people find the show. So absolutism wasn't just about the king's personality then. It had a real structure.
Oh, absolutely. You can break it down into 4 concrete pillars that held the whole system up.
Okay, let's walk through them. Pillar 1 would be political.
So he relied on loyal, appointed bureaucrats to run the country, bypassing the old, unreliable nobles.
Makes sense. Pillar 2?
Military. He maintained a permanent standing army, centrally funded and loyal only to him. This made France the strongest land power in Europe.
Okay, so political, military. Third would have to be economic. Mercantilism.
That's the one, led by his minister Colbert. The state got actively involved, boosting domestic trade and charging really high import taxes on foreign goods.
To keep the wealth inside France.
Keep it all circulating internally. And the 4th pillar was religious.
Unity.
Complete unity. Louis revoked the Edict of Nantes, which had allowed religious freedom. He wanted one king, one law, one faith.
Which caused thousands of Protestants, the Huguenots, to flee.
It did. But from his perspective, it consolidated his authority.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, even the Sun King, with all this power, had his limits.
He absolutely did. And this is where the theory meets a very interesting reality.
What stands out to me is this contradiction, that despite all this power and an empty treasury from all his wars, he was afraid to change the regional tax system.
Exactly. He feared widespread public unrest. He wouldn't touch the deeply rooted local legal systems or especially how taxes were collected province by province.
So that raises a huge question.
It really does. If an absolute monarch has divine right, but he's too afraid of his own people to reform taxes, how truly absolute was that power?
And that is the perfect final thought to leave you with. Just think about it. This 17th century idea that legitimate power comes directly from God. How does that concept and its limitations influence how we define legitimate government authority today?
Welcome to this deep dive where we're cutting straight through centuries of inherited belief to look at the scientific revolution. Our mission today is really to unpack how the entire method for finding truth just flipped in the 17th century. It's a huge shift away from simply accepting what the ancient Greeks had written.
It was a seismic transition. I mean, for thousands of years, knowledge was all about the authority of old books of natural philosophers. The revolution is that moment we as a society stopped just taking their word for it and started demanding proof. Hard evidence, rigorous reason. We've got sources that really detail the new methods and the often controversial figures who drove this.
Okay, let's break that down. This revolution, it wasn't just one idea. It seems to have been powered by two pretty distinct approaches. The first one being empiricism.
Right. And empiricism basically insisted that all knowledge has to be grounded in what you can observe. Direct observation, experiments. It was a huge change. It was all about self-research, what your own senses tell you. And that created a problem. How do you share all this new data? It meant we had to create new institutions like scientific academies just to keep up.
And the other side of that coin was rationalism. This was more about using pure reason, the mind, to investigate the world. So the rationalists argued that logical thought was everything, and you could find these universal natural laws and describe them with math. But hold on, if they're so focused on pure math, how do they actually test their ideas without, the physical observations of the empiricists?
That is the absolute key to it all. Separately, they both have limits. But when you bring them together, that's when you get the explosion. Thinking and seeing. Experimenting and calculating. That's the basis for modern science. And, it's really important to mention that thinkers needed a place to actually share these ideas safely. The Dutch Republic at the time offered a degree of freedom of conscience, which attracted a lot of these thinkers and let these sometimes heretical ideas flourish.
That context is so important. And actually, speaking of sharing knowledge, if you're learning something new with us today, please just take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really does help more people find this deep dive. All right, let's jump into the people. The biggest change first. Flipping the entire universe on its head. For centuries, the geocentric model was standard. The Earth is at the center of everything.
And that brings us straight to Galileo. He was a physicist, an astronomer, and he didn't just guess. He built his own, much better telescope. He used evidence like seeing the phases of Venus to prove the heliocentric model was right. The sun was at the center. And of course, his famous conflict with the church made him a kind of martyr for science, with that legendary phrase, "and yet it moves."
And what I find so interesting is that not all the discoveries were, cosmic. You have Antoni van Leeuwenhoek, not an academic at all. He was a merchant, autodidact. But he developed these incredibly powerful lenses, and with them, he discovered a whole new world. Bacteria, red blood cells. It's just a great reminder that anyone with a sharp eye could participate in this revolution.
Exactly. And the person who really ties it all together is Isaac Newton. He perfectly synthesized both empiricism and rationalism. He sees the apple fall, that's the observation, the empiricism, but then he develops the calculus, the rationalism, to provide the mathematical laws that describe why it falls. He didn't just describe what happens. His laws can predict it. It's observation feeding calculation, which allows for prediction. That's modern science.
So what's the big picture here? What does this all mean for society? The world basically changes from this mysterious, unpredictable place to something governed by a mechanical worldview.
Yeah, the core idea because the world is a machine. A machine that God started, but it runs according to natural laws that we as humans can figure out.
God becomes like a clockmaker.
The ultimate clockmaker. That concept is called deism. God sets the universe in perfect motion and then steps back. He doesn't interfere. And the implications were massive. This cemented the foundation for modern science, giving the West a huge advantage down the line.
Right, and if we connect this to what comes next, this whole idea of finding natural laws for the physical world, it eventually spills over into the social world. It directly sparks the Enlightenment.
It does. People starting to think, well, if we can find laws for planets and gravity, why not for society, politics, and human behavior?
And that really leaves you with our final thought for today. If the universe really does operate like a predictable machine based on knowable laws, does that mean that human society, that politics, that even our own behavior can also be broken down into universal predictable laws? That's something for you to consider.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a real historical anomaly, the Dutch Golden Age.
It's a fantastic topic.
Right. I mean, we're talking about the period from roughly 1588 to 1648. And you have to ask, how did this tiny collection of provinces become a global superpower?
That is the central question of the 17th century. And what's so fascinating is their political choice. While, all their neighbors, France, Spain, were building these absolute monarchies.
Centralizing power.
Exactly. This area breaks away from Spain and decides to govern itself, a decentralized republic in a sea of kings. It was completely radical.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack the specific drivers, the politics, the economics that made it all happen.
Let's do it.
So let's start with the money, the economic ignition. What was the big bang moment that let them corner global trade?
It was really about strategic opportunism. And here's where it gets really interesting. The fall of Antwerp in 1585,
Yeah.
when the Spanish took the city and closed the River Scheldt, Europe's main commercial hub just shut down. All that capital, all those merchant families, they just moved north.
Making Amsterdam the new center of everything.
Almost overnight, it became the staple market of Europe.
And that, combined with their genius move of controlling the Baltic grain trade,
Yes.
meant their own farmers didn't have to grow basic food. They could import cheap grain from the Oostergebied.
Which freed them up to specialize. They started producing high-value products, butter, cheese, meat. It created this huge secondary boom in the countryside.
So, okay, actually, before we get into the politics that manage all this wealth,
Yeah.
if you're finding this deep dive useful, it would be a huge help if you could take a moment to, hit that like or subscribe button.
Or leave a comment. It really does help us keep these conversations going.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, okay, the politics.
Mm.
This is where it gets complicated.
It is. This new republic was built on decentralization. Sovereignty didn't rest with the king, but with the 7 Gewesten provinces.
Like Holland and Zeeland.
Precisely. And this led to something historians call gewestelijk particularism, which basically means each province fiercely guarded its own laws.
But that sounds like it could cause problems. I mean, you need some kind of central control, right? For an army, for foreign policy.
Absolutely, and that's what the Staten General was for. Representatives from each province would meet to handle the big stuff. Defense, taxes, and dealing with other countries.
And within that system, you get this incredible power struggle. Because Holland was the economic engine, it paid for almost 60% of everything.
Which made its leader, the Ratspensionaris, incredibly powerful. Think of figures like Johan de Witt. This was the chief executive representing the merchant class.
And he was always in tension with the other major figure.
The stadtholder, usually a prince from the House of Orange like Willem III. He was the military commander.
So you have this constant battle, the Republican merchant view versus the more monarchical centralized view.
And all the while, the real day-to-day power in the cities was held by the Regenten, the rich merchant families you see in those famous Frans Hals portraits.
And just to put some dates on this, they got a crucial ceasefire with Spain, the 12-Jarige Bestand, from 1609 to 1621.
And then official recognition as a nation with the Peace of Munster in 1648.
Okay, so beyond money and politics, what made the society itself so unique?
I think it has to be the relative tolerance. This idea of Gewetensvrijheid or freedom of conscience.
So not total religious freedom, but...
No, not in the modern sense.
Right.
Catholics, for instance, often had to be discreet. But you weren't hunted down and murdered for your beliefs. This drew in skilled people from all over Europe. Protestants, Jews, other freethinkers.
And they fueled the economy and the culture.
Completely. The whole culture just exploded. Patronage wasn't from the king, it was from wealthy citizens. That's why you get Rembrandt and Vermeer painting scenes of everyday life.
And you have huge scientific leaps, too, like the microscope and the pendulum clock.
It was a true golden age.
So to sum it up, it was really a perfect storm of political innovation, merchant power, and social tolerance.
A dramatic but finite success. The end is often marked by the ramp jar, the disaster year of 1672. A tragic end.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider. That decentralization gave the Republic its flexibility and its wealth. But how did that exact same feature, that constant tension between the civilian Ratspensionaris and the military stadtholder, become its greatest vulnerability when it was attacked from all sides? Think about that trade-off between freedom and efficiency. Dive. Today, we're jumping straight into the 17th century. We want to understand that incredible economic engine of the Dutch Republic's golden age.
Right. And central to that, absolutely central, was the koopman, the merchant.
Exactly. This sort of visionary figure managing global logistics, financing. These are the people who really defined the era. We're here to figure out how they basically built the world's first, well, truly global economy.
That's the mission. We need to look closely at handles capitalism, commercial capitalism. That's the economic thinking that drove everything.
So where did the money actually come from? How was it all structured? Especially, after 1585 when Antwerp fell and Amsterdam kind of took over as the main hub.
Precisely. That shift is crucial.
Okay, so let's break down Handel's capitalism. It wasn't like the usual approach back then, just hoarding gold, right? Mercantilism.
No, not at all. This was different. The idea was that any money you made, any capital, had to go straight back in. It had to roll, as they said.
Into more trade or industry, maybe agriculture?
Yes, exactly. Reinvestment. Continuous expansion, not just sitting on wealth. That focus on growth rather than just having wealth, that's what made the Dutch model so revolutionary, really.
It's fascinating. But that kind of constant reinvestment, it needs a stable base, right? Where did that initial stability, that core capital, come from?
Well, that brings us to the most important trade of all, really, the Baltic trade, the Oostzeehandel.
Okay.
You see, the land in Holland and Zeeland, it wasn't very good for growing large amounts of grain. It was boggy, difficult.
Right, so they couldn't feed themselves easily with local grain.
Pretty much. So they cleverly used their shipping prowess to import essential goods really cheaply from the Baltic region. Think grain, lots of grain, and timber, wood. Basic commodities.
And by getting those essentials cheaply from elsewhere, that freed up their own land, didn't it, for things that made more money?
Exactly. High-value cash crops. Things like vild, which was used for making expensive dyes. So secure the cheap necessities from the Baltic, then focus your own land and labor on luxury or specialized goods.
That makes sense. It's efficient.
Extremely. And that's why the Baltic trade was so profitable and foundational. It got that nickname, the motor negoti.
The mother trade.
Yeah.
Because it basically birthed the capital for everything else.
That's a great way to put it. It didn't just bring in profit, it generated the capital base, the reserves needed for the next much bigger step, global expansion.
Okay, so the mother trade provides the cash. Now, they want to expand globally, but there's competition out there.
Right, and the Dutch approach to competition was pretty straightforward. Eliminate it, or at least control it. This led directly to them setting up two massive state-backed corporations, really pioneering organizations.
Let's start with the big one, the VOC, the Dutch East India Company, founded 1602.
Yep, the VOC. It was given a monopoly by the government, exclusive rights to trade in Asia.
Spices, primarily. That's what we always hear about. Nutmeg, pepper, clove.
Spices were huge, absolutely, hugely valuable. But the really deep dive here, the truly revolutionary part, is how the VOC was financed. Well, it wasn't just the biggest trading company in the world at the time, or the first real multinational. It was the first company ever to fund its massive expeditions, ships, crew, supplies, everything, by selling shares to the public.
Shares, like stock.
Exactly like stock.
Yeah.
Transferable shares. Anyone with spare cash could buy a piece of the VOC. This spread the risk, Instead of a few rich merchants funding a whole voyage, they tapped into bowed general public capital.
Wow. So the foundation of the modern stock market, basically.
Pretty much. Right there in Amsterdam, 1602. Profits were then paid out typically after a year or when a fleet returned. But we have to be clear here. Getting and keeping that monopoly wasn't peaceful.
No, I imagine not.
They had to push out rivals, especially the Portuguese who were there first. And they used significant force, coercion, even violence against the local populations in the Spice Islands to enforce their trade terms. It wasn't just about business deals.
Okay, so the VOC sets the model for global reach and this new kind of financing. Then comes the WIC, the West India Company, 1621.
That's right. The WIC had a slightly different kind of dual mandate.
How so?
Well, yes, it was about trade and setting up colonies in the West Indies, the Americas. But it also had a military function, specifically privateering.
Privateering, so state-sponsored piracy.
Essentially, yes. Because the Dutch Republic was still at war with Spain, the WIC was authorized to attack and capture Spanish ships, especially the treasure fleets coming from the Americas. It was economic warfare as much as trade.
Undercutting the enemy while also potentially making a profit.
Exactly. And if we look at the WIC's operations in the Atlantic, it became deeply involved in the triangle trade.
The slave trade.
Yes, the forced transport of enslaved Africans to the Americas. This labor was crucial for the colonies and plantations they established, places like Curacao, and in Suriname, growing sugarcane and coffee. Very profitable, but built on immense human suffering.
So putting it all together for someone listening. You have the Baltic trade providing the foundational cash.
The Modenego debt?
Then the VOC creates this template for global monopoly using public shares, focused on Asia.
Right, the first multinational first stock issuer.
And the WIC handles the Atlantic, mixing trade, colonization, warfare, and, tragically, the slave trade.
Correct. These three pillars working together, sometimes overlapping, they really constructed this first properly interconnected world economy in the 17th century. It was a Dutch-dominated system for a while.
An incredible run of dominance. But it didn't last forever, did it?
No, nothing does. By the later 17th century, things started to shift. Other powers, particularly England and France, were catching up. They were centralizing their states, building their own navies and trading companies, and competing much more effectively. The Dutch advantage began to erode.
Right. So thinking about that legacy then, especially the VOC model, selling shares to fund these incredibly risky long-distance ventures. How much of our modern global economy for venture capital, risk management, multinational corporations, how much of that really has its DNA traceable back to what these 17th century Dutch merchants needed to make capitalism work on a global scale?
That's a really powerful question. The structures they created out of necessity then, you can certainly see echoes of them everywhere in finance and global business today.
Something definitely worth thinking about as you continue your learning journey.